The university students gather in the plaza, shouting, laughing, singing, as the chest-high pile of books burn. A brass band plays. Each volume has been labeled un-German, degenerate, or counter to Nazi ideals. Leftist texts, Marxist texts, feminine texts, plays and poetry by Jewish people, books by pacifists or that portray war negatively like All Quiet on the Western Front. They even burn Helen Keller's books, because those argue for the humanity of the disabled. But they also burn scientific and medical texts. They throw Einstein and Freud on the bonfire, along with books by physician Magnus Hirschfeld, whose research library at his Institute for Sexual Research was the first ever burned. Mainstream science, the party believes, is too Jewish. The Nazis have their own science, you see. Science that is far more attuned to their beliefs. Weird science that's not really science at all. Thanks so much to Brilliant for continuing to support the learning of, real science. When we last left off, Hitler had just entered the orbit of the German Workers' Party, a right-wing working-class group formed by ex-Thule Society members. But he considered the party a bit of a joke, a committed atheist. He had little patience for the slipshod way it was run, and the absurd astrological and esoteric beliefs some of the members displayed, scoffing at the Thule Society as a tea club. Of course, that didn't mean he rejected their nationalism, antisemitism, and Völkisch ideas. In fact, his first notable act at a party meeting was to deliver a passionate and electrifying speech about the importance of uniting his native Austria and Germany into a greater political ethnic entity. And within the next few years, he rose in prominence, dispatching leadership rivals and centering more of the party's operations and goals around himself. Where have I seen that tactic recently? I don't know. Anyway. Yet in that time, when he ditched so many early aspects of the party and reinvented it, he never cleaned house on the occultists and astrologers who'd staffed its early membership. On the contrary, the party actually sponsored solstice festivals in 1920 and 1921, dedicated to Baldur the sun god and his son, Siegfried. The party newspaper ran articles claiming the cries of the Weimar Republic were foretold in Scandinavian sagas, and the newspaper's rhetoric increasingly spoke of communists as demons and Jews as vampires, trading on supernatural imagery. It intentionally courted and attracted the Ariosophists, adopting their eugenic tenets of protecting the Aryan race by banning interracial marriage, engaging in selective breeding, and eliminating or sterilizing racial or religious minorities and those with different bodies. All of this with the goal to create pure blood, which was really more of a spiritual concept than a scientific one, related to theorists who claimed humans were part animal, part angel, and that Nordic people had a greater proportion of angelic heritage, or else were part of a vanished alien super race from Atlantis. Now stopping for a second, if this all sounds a little sci-fi fantasy to you, there's actually a very good reason for that. See, Weimar Germany was awash in what we'd now refer to as pulp fantasy and science fiction, much of it involving tales of blonde Germanic supermen battling enemies clearly coded as leftist and Jewish, some of which took place in the ancient past, some in space. And as the party grew, it subsumed many of those writers into its propaganda machine, utilizing their sci-fi and horror talents into helping craft the image of the Nazi party and its foes. Granted, while many top-level leaders in the party, like Heinrich Himmler and Rudolf Hess, were very into occultism and astrology, overall, Hitler wasn't terribly interested in that stuff, despite regularly calling on tradition and the values of an imaginary past. Again, he was an atheist and considered himself a modernist who was more interested in science, or rather, things that, appeared science-y. See, he wanted the appearance of harnessing cutting-edge technology, but in truth largely rejected mainstream science. Because Nazi ideology held that science and academia was tainted by Jewish experts, Nazis instead rested on an alternate structure of pseudoscience and would have been called border sciences. Things that used the vocabulary of science, and that adherents claimed would be proven, but were in no way evidence-based. A great example is world ice theory that we mentioned last episode. The belief that the Earth had ice moons orbiting it in the past, and these had eventually smashed into the planet, triggering different epochs. As late as 1942, Hitler gave an interview personally endorsing the idea, going on to say that legends of cosmic cataclysm, such as Atlantis or Norse tales of gods battling ice giants, are only explicable if a disaster had destroyed an ancient culture with, quote, a high degree of human civilization. But this went far beyond world ice theory. The Nazis endorsed and even researched techniques such as dowsing, astrology, and homeopathy. In fact, many of these border sciences interacted with health, since along with science, they rejected mainstream medicine as well. This included stuff as wacky as magnetic therapy and spirit diagnosis, but also fairly reasonable practices like organic farming, anti-smoking campaigns, and vegetarianism. Yeah, Hitler's famous vegetarianism, this is where that comes from. They also threw money at researching techniques called esoteric farming. This was a precursor of organic farming created by the German theosophist Rudolf Steiner, who ironically fled Germany in fear of Hitler. Now, while esoteric farming included many aspects we'd recognize today, like refusing to use pesticides, it also suggested things like assisting plant growth with astrology, and advised burying a ram's horn stuffed with quartz crystal in the soil. In fact, remember how we talked last week about how Völkisch thinkers imagined a past where German peasants were mystically connected to their land? Well, Nazi thinkers actually fantasized about eventually recreating those communities and using esoteric farming techniques on land they'd conquered. But ultimately, the Nazis disliked and distrusted real science because it was based on the scientific method, a structure that, when used properly, does not conform to an ideological bias. University students, professors, and even many doctors were distrusted as secret communists since many of these sectors had opposed the rise of fascism. Similarly, the Nazis drove out prominent Jewish and leftist academics, creating a brain drain that ensured the country's scientific strength was severely weakened. This had a particularly disastrous impact on German physics, since several prominent physicists like Albert Einstein and Max Born were Jewish. Ironically, the flight of German physicists would ensure that Nazi nuclear research lagged behind the Allies and mostly focused on reactors for generating power. However, border sciences, like world ice theory, were more malleable, easier to bring inside the fold, but still seeming in the moment enough to give a gloss of modernism. Remember, Hitler desperately wanted his regime to be seen as modern, and he was well aware that his anti-Semitic policies appeared medieval. Religious persecution, laws against intermarriage, and ghettos had quite literally been practiced for centuries in Central Europe, and internationally, they were called out as such. As a result, when trying to define Jewishness legally ahead of the Nuremberg laws, Hitler was desperate to find a standard other than religious practice that would separate Jews from Aryans. And he couldn't find one. From blood tests to facial measurements, it quickly became clear that there was no way you could just throw a measuring tape around someone's skull and tell biologically if they had Jewish heritage. He finally had to give up and simply make the test. Do you, or did any of your ancestors, practice the Jewish religion? And that, more than anything, exposes how Nazi radical ideology rested on pseudoscience, and what is at the bottom is really a supernatural belief rather than a scientific one. Well, that and how originally the Nazis spoke about Japan as part of the, quote, Asian horde that were trying to take over the world, but then when an alliance looked appealing, their propagandist explained that, oh, well, actually, the Japanese are like the Aryans of East Asia and are totally part of the higher races as well. Yeah, that one caused some whiplash even among the most indoctrinated Nazis. And the reason pop culture thinks of Nazi Germany as an era of not just science, but super science, is that their propagandists were so good at choosing projects that would impress and intimidate. The V-2 rocket, the battleship Bismarck, the first jet used in combat. Many of these were termed wonder weapons, stuff pulled directly from science fiction, which newspapers and radio broadcasts touted as being able to turn the tide of the war. Of course, they couldn't. The Bismarck sank on its maiden voyage. V-2s were random unguided weapons that terrified civilians, but had near-zero military utility. And the Me-262 jet? Well, America also had jets, but they weren't desperate enough to risk them being downed and captured. The German miracle weapons, by contrast, really existed largely as a way to convince the German public that their government was capable of great things, selling the myth of scientific achievement while ignoring the fundamentals. Ultimately, that tendency toward grandiose claims substituting for actual reality would arguably lose them the war, with Hitler getting high on his own supply, thinking that not only could he invade and occupy the Soviet Union, but simultaneously fight the United States as well. However, in this venture, science was not the only thing the Nazis would turn against. Plus, it's not like weird science is a thing of the past, right? Today, we're still inundated with bad sources informed more by ideologies than the scientific method, which is why, personally, when I'm looking to learn something new about science, math, data analytics, or programming, I turn to Brilliant. Brilliant is a learning platform where you learn by doing, with courses crafted by an award-winning team of teachers, researchers, and professionals from places like MIT, Caltech, Duke University, Microsoft, and Google that you can complete on your own schedule anywhere you have the time. I've said this in the past, but I basically consider it like my anti-doom scrolling because I can just do it whenever I have free minutes and I don't feel bad afterward. And I think Brilliant is super engaging due to their first principles approach, with interactive lessons designed to build up your critical thinking skills through problem solving and not just memorizing, which works way better for me. For instance, some of you may know that we just wrapped a Kickstarter for our history calendar, right? Okay, well, what you may not know is that now we get to sort through thousands of orders of multiple bundles and add-ons to get the print runs started on time and have them be correct. And thanks to my having completed Brilliant's thinking and code lessons that taught me things like conditional statements and advanced loops, I was able to help Jeff and Kat out sorting the biggest spreadsheet I have ever seen in my entire life. And I was able to learn how to do it with fun multi-part lessons in my spare minutes, again on my phone. So if you want to up your game by learning something new or just brush up on some STEM that, may have gotten a little rusty on, you can try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days by visiting brilliant.org/extrahistory or by clicking the link in the description, which, by the way, will also get you 20% off an annual premium subscription. So what are you waiting for? You can become more brilliant by clicking here, and then once you've bettered your brain, check out another of our videos here. What if I told you that Angelo Valenciana, Arcalite Games, Dominic Valenciana, Foxdog, Hunter Z, Joseph Blame, Kuya Koya, and Ziliad Architectures were fantastic legendary patrons? Because it's true!